We just did the kick. The kick is already there. It was a really nice sounding kick. We wanted to make sure the low end of the track was very simple too. A lot of our music has very hip hop inspired, as you probably heard from other tracks and the vocal sample we used in this track. We kind of like the 808s or that kind of UK bass sound you can get that really can fill up the space without being too high harmonics. We notice it works really well in the clubs. Most clubs have what's called a crossover, and it's basically like a device that takes anything that's below 200 hertz and sends it only to the subs, and everything above 200 hertz goes to the speakers and tweeters above in the room. And so when you have a bass like this, it really feels like it hits you in the chest in the club, and it just has a nice satisfying feeling. And I really enjoy how those basses sound more so than like saw basses. Not that saying that saw basses are bad, it just like works better for us for what we're trying to do. I think that you just have to try to figure out what works for you, and you have to think about where your music's being played, especially if it's in club systems. Things like 808s, there's a reason why they've been around for so long and super popular. They're really great to use. So we went ahead and instead of using a sample, there's plenty of 808 samples out there. We went ahead and made our own sound. The reason why we made the sound was because we wanted to have more control over the length and decay and the punch of the sound, and we needed it to fit exactly with the kick and everything else. And sometimes it's hard to find the right sample. It's pretty easy to make really good 808s with just a couple few parameters. We used Onto to make this. It's a very, very great simple plugin. It has a lot of great presets, but since it was such a simple sound, we just used the initial preset. We set the first oscillator to a sine wave. It is nothing fancy. It's doing like a tiny bit of FM to get some higher frequencies on it with oscillator 2. And oscillator 2, it's on, it's a saw wave, but it's a super low volume. And there's no high end in it because the cutoff is here. It's not going up, and it's just using an envelope a little bit to make the sound open up a little bit when it hits. And it's just following this envelope here. It's not a very big envelope. It's just opening a little bit. And then there's just a little bit of, there's no sustain on it. It's just a decay and release so that we could get it to be the exact length we wanted. And here's how that sounds. It's a very simple sound. I'm going to go ahead and turn off all these other plugins that are happening here for you to hear the raw sound, because it's kind of interesting what happens, why we add all these plugins here afterwards. So the sound is really cool. It's got a nice warmth to it. But for us, we wanted to make it sound more like an 808. We wanted to give it a little bit more punch. So we started off with this, and then very likely what we ended up doing is we started with just the saturator and this EQ8. I don't know why this is on. The saturator is going to give it some power. It's going to get some volume, and it's getting a lot of harmonics. So let's turn this off and turn it on. It's a huge difference in volume, but it's also a huge difference in harmonics. It's really important that when you're thinking about things like laptop speakers and AirPods, that the bass still has to sound full on those. Most people listen to music on AirPods or iPhones and things like that, so it's important you think about that while you're producing. Next plugin is called Reviver. It's not really a fancy plugin. It just boosts some harmonics of things. It's really more about targeting some frequencies. You can just target the second and third harmonics. So it's just, again, another thing we needed to do to make sure it sounded good on laptop speakers. It's not doing a lot of stuff. It's just very minimal. We have a glue compressor on here. You can use any compressor. We just use the Ableton glue compressor because it's just super easy to use. It's letting a little bit of the attack through. We just needed the bass to punch a little bit because it is an 808. It's got to be thumpy. It's got to kind of match the intensity of the kick drum because the kick drums are very thumpy. So with or without the glue compressor, you really hear more of that attack and kind of like punch that comes through. And then we had a utility. I think the cut signal coming in was pretty low, so we just turned it up using a utility. And a limiter. And a limiter is just catching the peaks and kind of making it sound a little bit more even. After that, we have an EQ8. This EQ8 is not really doing anything because it sounds pretty good as is. I think we tested this, like trying to see if it would do anything, and it just kind of made it a little messy. And then we have an auto filter because all this stuff here is actually bringing up all the clickiness of the top of the bass. We really wanted to get rid of it, so we kept the sound of the bass more in that range where that crossover hits. So let's turn off the auto filter and let's hear how it sounds. So it's really important for us to make sure that we cut off all those clicks and things. The more you can cut off, the better, to make sure you have clarity. You're not going to really hear those clicks on the track, but over time, when you're stacking layers upon layers, that's when it makes a huge difference. And that's why we do that on a lot of our basses. The last thing that we are doing is we're using this GML audio ducker. It's like a Max for Live plugin for side chaining. The reason why we're using this instead of something like a volume automation is because if you look in the track, you'll see these kicks have like double kicks. So it's going to duck every time the kick hits. It's looking at it. You can use the Ableton sidechain compressor to do something like this. We just found that this is a little cleaner for us, and we can also do like inversion of the phase of the kick. That's really important because if your kick and bass are phasing together, it's not going to be as powerful. So we can just invert this. If we feel like it's not quite right, we can invert it. And sometimes it makes the bass pop out way more. It gives us much more space in the track. So this is what we're doing here. You won't really be able to hear this because it only really works when the kick and bass playing, but I can play it with you can watch how it works with the double and triple kicks. Yeah, it's just a nice way to let the kick do a little bit of work instead of just having it being triggered by like a quarter note or something like that. And then you'll notice here in the track, we have this layer here. This is probably another layer we just messed around with trying to get this right sound. This version is the same exact version that's here. The only difference is that we've went through here and we bounced this to audio. And the reason why we did that is because you notice here while it's playing, there's a little bits of like extra stuff here. And we just feel like this stuff is something you could clean up. A friend of ours, long story short, showed us the trick a while ago, and we've been using it, and it's made our low end so much cleaner. And I would recommend, if you are working with things like 808 basses or things that have low end, getting all these tails cleaned up, again, making more space in the track. This is the most important thing you can do if you want to clean up your low end, is to make a bunch of little changes over time. It's really important you do that. This is the last thing that we do because when we're playing it out, we're not super worried about it. We really don't know how the vibe of the track is. This is the last like 10% of the work. So I would suggest making sure you go through, make your bass choices. Once you're finally happy with the bass, go ahead and bounce it to audio and make sure that it sounds really good and clean, and cut off those tails.